Hi, Kobus. First of all, thank you for agreeing for the interview. It's a thing we do at least once a week. I reach out to South Africans across the world, and whoever is up for it, I want to hear their story. And what we found was it's not just me that wants to hear it; it's the rest of the South African expat community, and especially those back home that is still contemplating what am I going to do? Am I going to stick around? Am I going to see where things are going with the economy and with the government? Or am I going to maybe see if I can secure something different for my children? And these sort of stories is what encourages them to make that decision and to make that move. First of all, thank you. As I said, please introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah, you must hear a lot of interesting stories, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay, my name's Kobus De Villiers. We're living in Canada at the moment since 1997. I'm married to a French girl, Marie-France, and I retired at age 55 after arriving in Canada at age 41. So you can do a good job when you get to Canada. And then they lured me back to start going back to work again. And I worked for another company for 3 years, and then I finally retired. So now we're just traveling. I'm writing my books. I did work for another 3 years. And so at age 58, I retired. And since then, we've been just traveling and taking photos and writing my books.
Well, that sounds like the life to me. Now, I saw you share one of your books on Russia. Do you mind? I'm going to be digging a bit into the journey from South Africa to Canada, because that sounds really interesting. But I mean, for someone that's not just written one book but 5, you're definitely doing something right. Do you mind telling us a bit about your latest book?
Okay, the latest book is called A Postcard uit Moscow. In 1989. The South African government started making overtures to the Russians to try and lure them away from the ANC, because they knew there were going to be big changes coming and the war in Angola had stopped. At that stage, I had spent about on aircraft projects. I'm an aircraft engineer, an aeronautical engineer. I studied both in South Africa and in other countries. And for many years, I did work for Arms Corps in strange places. So in 1991, I ended up with a team of people in Russia living in Brezhnev's dacha. And we put some MiG engines into South Africans' Mirages. So that's the latest book. But the book that I put aside that you're referring to is called Once Upon I Lived in Africa. At one stage, we were living in Canada, and I was traveling back and forth to Caltech in California. You know, Caltech is the place where NASA has their jet propulsion lab. And I was doing work there for a Canadian company. And for the umpteenth time, somebody asked me, "Where are you from?" when they heard me speaking Afrikaans to my son. Like the book, because every time people keep asking me, "Where are you from? What was it like living there?" Because they have no idea really. All they heard is the bad stuff about apartheid.
Yeah.
So that book, Once Upon I Lived in Africa, I wrote in English so that the foreigners could read it. And my wife, being a linguist, could help me edit it because she can speak more than one language. And that book is the one that a lot of people who are living overseas, who are missing South Africa, they like reading that book. So it's one of my better sellers.
What is it about this book that you feel resonates with South Africans living abroad? For me personally, if I see pictures of Namaqualand and the Karoo and hear about those stories, those are the things that really gets me choked up and a bit tearful. And then I write Afrikaans poetry. It's something I really like doing. That's when I'll go sit down for an hour just crunching and digging into those memories to see how I can put it into a sort of a context where someone can not just read it, but make connection with it. What is it about your book that does that for them?
Well, I was a bit of a strange kid. from about 7 years old, I was telling people that I'm going to work for NASA at Caltech to build airplanes and rockets. And of course, people thought I'm a bit silly. So I started by describing, and I wrote this mainly for my kids originally. That's a lot of the tales that I told them, because they wanted to know, why did we always live in strange countries, and why were you away from home from long periods? Why could you tell us what you're doing in your job? So a lot of these stories was what I told them about my childhood. So when I started putting a whole thing together, what I think starts off where I'm a small kid and I start understanding what's going on around me in the Free State and on the farm with my grandparents and all the crazy things we did. You know, I built rockets and I built an airplane and I flew off the garage roof and stuff like that. And then, of course, I blend in the nature. I blend in the interaction with the farm workers and the fact that we could all speak Sotho and the people can understand. There wasn't a war between us, habits and where they come from, like the shearers, when they come to the farm, you know, they all come from Lesotho, and then we know their songs and things like that. And then the book ends where I'm doing my national service and I'm in a really bad situation, and we are putting some of our friends in body bags. So to give them kind of the whole spectrum of being a happy, carefree kid growing up in a country where you can run around barefoot and play in the mud, and we had snakes in the backyard and strange animals on the farm in this war in Angola. And I think a lot of people who are from South Africa and who've moved away, when they read this, they can kind of visualize their own childhood and playing late at night and riding bicycles in the street and, you know, the things we did as kids. Yeah. And I think that's why South Africans like that. Although I must say, a lot of Canadians and a lot of Americans really like the book too. For them, it's a novelty, of course, because it's such a different lifestyle. But the South Africans that are homesick, they buy the other books.
Yeah. And look, the South African story, it doesn't matter which version of it you hear, there is a version of it somewhere in the international history books. Obviously, apartheid covers most of that topic, but here and there's certain things that will seep through some of the good stuff that South Africa has achieved. So it makes them curious. And I reckon a story like yours, for someone that has only known one country his whole life, like, for instance, take America. They're very patriotic over there, and they're very focused on, I was born and raised in America, and for someone that's just ever known one place, to read a story from someone that was born somewhere else, technically from a continent where we're not natively from originally, and then sort of being forced to look elsewhere to make it in life. That's an interesting read. I mean, I would read that. If I was from another country, I would definitely read that.
Yeah, you know, this whole thing about growing up in Africa and people not understanding how Europeans ended up there. To give you an idea, I was in Canada for a short while and I was really missing South Africa. And the company I worked for had these different kind of groups that made people get together, and Canadians tend to be very nice to each other and they want to know about each other. And it's an immigrant country. So there was an organization in Africa, the Afro-Canadians can join this group. So I thought, this is great. I'm going to join it, and I'll most probably meet other South Africans there, and we can have a chat. And I write the story in the book. And then I arrive at this place, and there's this big noise going on, a lot of people talking, everybody having a good time. And as soon as I walk in, the whole place goes dead silent because I'm the only white person. And then when I started... When I started talking to these people, many of them were descendants of slaves. And of course, they welcomed in Canada. The slavery wasn't in Canada. They were mesmerized. They became some of my best buddies. They really couldn't believe that the guy from Europe could come from Africa and tell them things that kind of jives with what their stories that was handed down to them from a long time ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very unique situation. And then, of course, because I've been in so many countries, you pick up lots of things. You know, I lived in Israel for 5 years. I worked in Russia in and out for 2 years, in Italy. I worked in France. I worked in Italy. So and then of course in the States and in Canada. So you get a lot of stuff that you carry with you. And because of my job being so secret, I could never talk about it. But I made a lot of notes. So once I retired, and most of these things are now a public knowledge that it's not secret anymore. That's why I ended up writing 5 books. Yeah, look, and in 1976, 77, when the boycotts against South Africa started, they went around and they collected some young engineers that had some potential, and we were all sent away to get trained to become aerospace or aeronautical engineers, because they wanted to develop Atlas and they wanted to develop aircraft stuff. So I ended up in Italy for a while, and I did some study there, and I worked there for Aeromacchi. And I came back, and then the next thing is they sent me off to Israel, and I ended up there for 5 years, living there and working there on quite a few projects. Some of those we still can't talk about. And then I came back, and then we kept being sent back and forth. I did short-term work in France. I did short-term work in Peru. I made a list of, in the UAE. I worked in the UAE quite a bit. So we did a lot of clandestine work back and forth, sometimes in collaboration with other countries. And so you're there for a while and you come back. And that's how the project with Russia ended up. That was the last big project I did for South Africa. So there for 2.5 years, I was traveling back and forth, basically being smuggled into Russia in the beginning until the things became a bit more open. We actually lived in Brezhnev's dacha. We had the design team in Brezhnev's dacha to keep it secret, because the place had a wall around it. And, when Brezhnev used that as his dacha, of course, there was high security.
Yeah.
So we had these KGB guys driving us around and taking care of us while we were working there.
That is incredible. That's like a proper Jason Bourne stuff. I love it.
I wrote 3 books about that part, so.
Wow, the little boy in me is going crazy. So, okay,
yeah.
let's go through your books then. So the first, tell us about the first book you did, and then continue.
Okay, so the first book is called Uiters Geheim en Ander Anecdotes, because, top secret and other anecdotes. So it was written in Afrikaans, and this also starts the journey. How the hell did I end up wanting to do this kind of strange job, completely out of line with anybody? My family were farmers and dominees and stuff like that. So it's a kind of a book that my kids could understand where everything came from. But then the thing developed, and of course it ended up with this work that I did in Russia, and how we ended up in Canada, and then some of the work I did in Canada as well. And that became so popular, the publisher asked me to translate it to English. So I translated it to English with the help of my wife, because she's a linguist. She studied languages. So English for her, although she's French speaking, English is one of the languages she's quite good in. So we got that book out. And then the things developed. I wrote a book called Vlug 237, which was about one specific project that we worked on in Israel, but I made it what they call faction, fact and fiction mixed. And that became very popular. And then came this book that started the conversation between you and I, which was Once Upon a Time I Lived in Africa.
Yes.
Because so many people always asked me, where are you coming from? I spent a lot of time on aeroplanes, so you end up next to somebody and you can't tell them the real story. You can't say, oh, well, I'm on my way to Russia to go work on a secret Russian project. you tell them whatever cover story we were given, but they can hear your accent and they know you're not from there. And then that specific day, I sat in the airport, and my son called me, my eldest son, and we were talking Afrikaans on the phone. And some American salesman sat next to me, and he said, what the hell kind of language is that, and where are you from? So when I told him, he said, no, that's not possible. You're not even black. So that's when I decided I've got to write a book about this, because I get the same questions over and over. That's when I wrote that book, the one that triggered our conversation. And that went down very well with people living overseas. And then funny enough, with South Africans who are homesick and who are away from home. It became a gift book. People give it to their father for Father's Day, or send it to their grandfather back in South Africa and stuff like that. And then the last book was, once the secrecy around the project in Russia was lifted, I wrote this story called A Postcard at Moscow, which is all about a postcard that I bought and I wanted to send back to my then girlfriend, who's my wife now. And I realized I can't do this. It goes against all the security regulations because they were not supposed to know even where we were. And that's how that book developed.
Wow. Sure. There's and I can also see there's already some interest in the out of Once Upon a Time in Africa book on Worcia. I can see people are asking where they can buy it. I do hope, and you're more than welcome to share as much as you want, and I do hope you get some sales out of that. The thing that I've learned, and I'm not nearly as well traveled as yourself. But I lived in the UK for 3 years with my wife and my son and my one daughter, and then when we came over here, we had my third daughter. And the same thing that I see, which I saw in the UK, is that South Africans do get homesick. Yes, there's a phase where they go through this sort of a honeymoon period overseas, where they're like, oh, everything's better, everything's great, the water's running, electricity is always on, the beaches are nice and clean. And then there's that second year where they sort of, for us personally, it was the difficult year, because you're learning how to work with your new finances, because everything is different. You're learning how to connect with the locals. I told my wife always, nah, it's not that. It can't be. We're a busy family. We just,
No, but that's true. And that's one thing I had some difficulty with when I came here. Canadians are very sensitive on the way how you give them instructions. And if they work for you, how to get them to believe in you and to follow you. And, you know, sometimes I had some big design teams, a rather large team of people and big budgets. And things get hectic and you get behind budget, and the American Air Force is complaining we are not getting the thing out that they want. And when you start pushing people, they don't like that. The management likes South Africans because we get things done. They like our work ethic, and they know that there's no nonsense around us. Because the one company I worked for at one stage, the CEO was a South African, the CFO was a South African, and I was a director of programs. So there were at least 3 guys at the top, and the board of directors liked us, but the staff had some difficulty getting used to our management style. You know, you have to sit down and get them all to agree, and they must all be able to lift their grievances and get them to believe in the target and all that. It takes longer to get them going, but once they work, it's fine. I mean, they work well. The people I liked most to work with were the Germans. We were in Germany from 2004 until 2007 for the Canadian company that I was working, but we were doing the fuel cell stuff for Mercedes-Benz advanced vehicles, where they do the research for their future cars. And there we fitted in fine, because the Germans were the same. They get stuff done, they work hard, and you don't have to really come and talk to them very nicely to get stuff done. So that was a good period, good part of my career. I had a lot of fun there.
Well, the Germans and the South Africans, or the Afrikaners specifically, has a lot of common. We even share a part of our language with them. And of the few Germans that I've known, I could see similarities in the personality. The one thing I really want to know is, so besides your staying in Canada and the books you've written, you obviously come from somewhere. Now, we know very little about that. Where in South Africa are you from? And can you enlighten us a bit? Tell us a bit more. Yeah.
Well, I grew up in Welkom in the Free State, the gold mine town. I was born in Bloemfontein. And then my father, who was a pathologist, he went to Welkom because they opened a mining hospital, Ernest Oppenheimer Hospital, and he became the chief pathologist there. So that's why we moved there. My mom was an elementary school teacher, very artistic person. She should have been an artist. That's actually what she wanted to do. The person that had the biggest influence on my life was my my grandpa on my mom's side, because he was a farmer, but I think in his heart, he wanted to be an engineer. And when he started finding out the stuff I like and the things I'm interested in, he really helped me a lot. He boosted me. So that's the background. I went to school at Goudveld in Welkom. I did the mechanical engineering degree at Tukkies. Then I went to Atlas Aircraft. First, I worked for South African Airways because I had to get a bursary. I mean, there was not money to pay for my studies. And so Atlas Aircraft Corporation bought out my bursary, and I was there only about 7 months. They sent me to Italy to go and study further and to work at the Aeromacchi. And there I worked for a guy called Dr. Bazocchi, genius guy, and he taught me a hell of a lot. So that's where the whole journey started.
Right, Kobus, thank you so much for your time. I had a good chat on and off camera, and thanks for the bit of Afrikaans. It was great talking it. If you can just please take a few seconds and tell us, where can we buy your books from?
Okay, so in South Africa, the books are available from my publisher, Malherbe Uitgewers, or from Bargain Books. Outside of South Africa, my books are on Amazon, and they are available in print and in ebooks from Amazon. And I've got people in Australia, New Zealand. I heard the other day from someone in Croatia that bought a book of mine. They can get them, any of the books can be obtained from Amazon outside of South Africa.
That is wonderful. Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to speaking to you again. And
Okay.
I just want to take a second and just apologize for the internet connections and all of that. I'm happy
that's nothing.
we got there in the end. It's funny and ironic that even here in first world countries, we do have our connectivity problems at times.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But imagine if we didn't have the internet.
Or the electricity. All right, I'll leave
Yeah.
that. I'll leave that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
You too. Keep well. Huh?
Bye.
Bye.